Aloha, Awinala. Good afternoon, and how's it, everyone? My name is Anne, and on behalf of the Multiolelo team, I'd like to welcome you to our third webinar series on language research communication. Multiolelo, or MO for short, is a student-led initiative aiming to make research more accessible and engaging in multiple languages through various ways in communication. Before we begin, the Multiolelo team would like to thank the Department of Second Language Studies here at the University of Hawaii at Manoa for their continuous support for the Multiolelo initiative since it was established in 2018. We would also like to express our appreciation to the UH Manoa's Student Equity Excellence Diversity Program for funding this event. Now, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for today's webinar, Dr. Saft. Originally from the East Coast of the United States, Dr. Saft received his PhD from the East Asian Languages Department at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. After several years teaching English and linguistics in Japan, he returned to Hawaii and is now currently serving as a professor of linguistics and chair of graduate studies in the Kahakaula Oke'i Likolani College of Hawaiian Language at the University of Hawaii at Hilo on the Big Island. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Saft.
Okay, so yeah, thank you very much, Anne, for the introduction. And thank you very much to the entire MO team for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. And I'm gonna be just showing you a part of my research, something that I've been, well, interested in for a while. And so I have a PowerPoint. Let me share that with you. Okay, so yeah, so here's the title, and it's kind of a mouthful. I'm going to try to break it down for you and show you some examples, and then hopefully give us some talking points for discussion at the end. Okay, so a little bit of background. So this comes from basic. Well, my interest in and my attempts more recently to try to understand the arrangement of languages in a multilingual society, and this comes largely from my experience here in Hawaii, living here, working here for numerous years. So I'm going to talk about one aspect of that today. And notice here that I've kind of put the scare quotes around the term dynamic arrangement of languages in a multilingual society. The idea that more recent research on multilingualism, bilingualism is now, as opposed to older research where you talked about the arrangement of languages, but you didn't necessarily talk about too much about how the languages intersected with each other. And now more recent attempts to kind of really focus on that intersection of languages, and calling it dynamic. Okay, not my words, but it's out there in the literature. Okay, and so this intersection of languages, what we find, and what shouldn't be much of a surprise to anybody interested in language, interested in discourse, communication, get the mixing of languages. And it's something that I found to be very prevalent in Hawaii. And not sure where everybody is currently, but if you are here in Hawaii, I imagine you've had a similar experience. Okay, and here are just some examples just around my little area here. The first one comes from actually the Student Life Center over here in, I'm in Hilo. Lately, it seems like it's miles and gazillions of miles away from the rest of civilization. But anyway, we have Student Life Center. Go over there to, get a sweat in and, have this re-rack your weights when pau, and you probably will recognize every word except the last word as English. Okay, and the last word, those of us in Hawaii will recognize as it's actually originally Hawaiian, been adopted into our local Creole language, which I'm going to refer to as a pidgin with a capital P, pidgin. By some mixing here. Keiki swim lessons, another one, see around town. Same thing with keiki. It's a word from Hawaiian adopted into our capital P, pidgin. And the last one of my favorites, and this actually goes back a few years, but I've kind of brought it back when necessary at a meeting. It was actually a youth basketball tournament over here in Hilo, and one parent yelling to a younger child, Helimai, you're brought over here, and of course mixing here Helimai from Hawaiian with English. Okay, so and these are just, well, all around me, all around us here in Hawaii, kind of the assumption here. Okay, so the first problem, and this is kind of, so I'm going to talk about, I'm going to kind of go through how I'm approaching this phenomenon, in terms of analyzing it and then trying to kind of talk about it, disseminate information about it. And I'm going to kind of raise three problems along the way. And the first problem is, how do we even talk about this phenomenon? And if you are, like me, a little bit older perhaps, and you kind of came of age in the study of language, especially communication and discourse. Yeah, you probably, back in back when I was a student in the 90s, there was basically one way to talk about this kind of mixing of languages, and it was code switching, right? Oh, okay, you're interested in code switching. Okay, well, go forward to 2020, and now there are multiple ways of talking about this, and you find in the literature, you'll find these multiple terms that have been used, and this is just a few. There are probably others as well, and you certainly recognize some of them. Maybe some of them you won't, but they definitely are out there, have been out there. And personally, in the past, because this topic I've been interested in, I've preferred, or I don't know if prefer is the best word, but I've used the term heteroglossia, some of my work, to talk about this in Hawaii, and this has seemed like a good term to use, coming from Bakhtin's work, stressing the multivocality, just the amount of voices that can go into, and here we're talking about discourse, and I'm going to talk mostly about discourse in terms of not written discourse, but kind of communication. But the fact that you'll find, multiple voices, and this could certainly mean multiple languages, doesn't necessarily have to mean multiple languages, but I'm going to specifically kind of talk about here what we recognize as multiple languages. Okay? And especially I've liked heteroglossia because Bakhtin was interested in how the different voices can, people can use them in the same communication event and even in the same utterance, right? Even though they might have deeper meanings in that community and that culture that are even kind of conflicting with each other. And here's a quick example. Just, when you think about English here in Hawaii used together with Pidgin, capital P, Pidgin, okay, well, English and Pidgin come from very, very different backgrounds, in a sense, in terms of their kind of social historical meanings that are attached to both of them, right? As Pidgin is kind of being a stigmatized language from the very long time ago, and English is kind of being the more esteemed language, but yet they're used together. And just kind of interesting how what should be kind of clashing ideologies are put together and are used in communication and interaction and discourse, sometimes in a very creative, effective manner. Okay, but here, though, I'm going to try translanguaging, and if you're interested in this, if you've been keeping up with this term, it's becoming more and more popular, and it's kind of being promoted. And you'll see later when I have some definitions, not by me, but promoted as a transformative and a social justice approach to language and communication. Okay, and that's actually what why I deciding to use that at this time is because if we're trying to understand dynamic multilingualism in the society, and if we're at the same time trying to promote some kind of understanding, appreciation, and tolerance toward, right, not just say individual languages, okay, but also different ways of interacting, ways of being, okay, well then maybe, right, and that's give it away now, that's what I'm interested in. Maybe translanguaging is a term that we can use. Okay, so translanguaging, so we need some kind of definition to get us going, get us started. So here is, this is, well, there's several out there. This is the shortest one, and I'll try to unpack this a little bit. Deployment of a speaker's full linguistic repertoire. Okay, and that's just going to be an important aspect of this, without regard for watchful adherence to the socially and politically defined boundaries of named and usually national and state languages. Okay, so there are a couple points here to kind of unpack. Okay, so first of all, this is the idea that we're going to actively recognize, right? Instead of saying, okay, now, hey, you gotta speak English, speak it well, speak it correctly. Oh, now you're speaking Japanese. Okay, make sure you get your grammar, get this pronunciation. No, we're not going to necessarily worry about what is being used in communication. We're going to worry about the fact that people are effectively communicating, and it really doesn't matter what that category that falls into, but we're trying to recognize their communicative abilities and appreciate them and try to even develop them and build on them for the good of those people and for society perhaps. Okay, so here's another quotation. So I got it. Yeah, this part has quite a few quotations in there, some a little bit long. So yeah, so you can kind of see where the transformative, the social justice aspect starts to come in here. Okay, and notice also these are coming from the work of Ophelia Garcia and Ricardo Othgai and some of their colleagues. They've been some of the major proponents of translanguaging. Okay, so yeah, so let's see. I don't know if we want to read through this whole thing, but notice at the very end, right? So operate at nearly or full idiolect. So their point has been that nobody really speaks the same language the same way anyway. Everybody has their own idiolect. So it's kind of silly to expect people, or I don't know about silly, but it's just, it's a bit restricting to expect people to speak what other people deem to be, the language, right? So, this idea that, languages listed here like English, Japanese, Tagalog, Hawaiian, and Pidgin, right, are kind of constructed as official languages and thus, kind of taught, these languages are taught and people are supposed to kind of try to achieve these ideals, even though what they're actually using in communication might be just as effective and possibly even more effective without worrying about exactly what they're speaking. Okay, so yeah, so in fact, in the translanguaging view, the linguistic competence of an individual does not consist of complete autonomous linguistic systems. So repertoire, right? So repertoire of linguistic resources, and it doesn't matter if that corresponds to a named language or not. Okay, and this is kind of abstract. I'm going to show you a little data later, and so hopefully this will, the abstractness will be able to be kind of, put actual instances of interaction on this abstractness. Okay, but the part B, or the second part of this definition, okay, and this is, right, this has been a little bit of a debate in this literature, is that between the translanguagers and the code switchers, okay, is that the translanguagers have been kind of critical of code switching, or examining, right, because both are, the combination of languages in the same communicative event, okay, but that code switchers tend to say, oh, here we see somebody speaking Japanese, oh, here they're speaking English. So actually this person who's code switching can speak both English and Japanese, right? And they exist as kind of autonomous languages in that person's head. But here in this case, they're just mixing them for some reason. And the translanguage proponents have kind of saying, well, that's not the way it works. Instead of having dual kind of competencies in the brain, okay, we all have one basic competency in communication and using language, but that linguistic repertoire that constitutes our competency, okay, might be consisting of various different resources, various different components that may or may not fit into a specific language. Okay, and here's another kind of a long quotation, but right, so the concept of translanguaging goes beyond code switching. So this is from the translanguage proponents actually criticizing code switching. Code switching refers to the mixing or switching of two static language codes, translanguaging, resting on the concept of transculturation, and here referencing Argentinian writer Walter Mignon. Okay, but translanguaging is about a new languaging reality, original, independent from any of the parents or codes. So it's a new way of being. By translanguaging, you're being creative. You're kind of creating your own identity in a way through communication. Okay, so yeah, so the very last sentence, two last sentences, translanguaging brings into the open discursive exchanges among people in ways that recognize their values of languaging and allowing fluid discourses to flow. Translanguaging has the potential to give voice to new social realities. So again, that's, very nice verbiage there. And so that kind of plays into this idea of how focusing on translanguaging might be a transformative way of looking at the way actual people in interaction, the way they communicate, and not trying to kind of pigeonhole them into speaking language A or language B, just again appreciating the effective ways that they're capable of communicating. All right, so here we get some few more quotations about how translanguaging might be deemed as transformative. Okay, and the second one here. So what makes translanguaging different from these other fluid languaging practices? So here they're kind of referring to the other terms like code switching, even plurilingualism, code meshing. Okay, but translanguaging is different because it's transformative. So it's attempting to wipe out the hierarchy of languaging practices that deem some more valuable than others, right? So here we get thus translanguaging could be a mechanism for social justice, especially when teaching students from language minoritized communities. So their basic concern, and of course this, they're not concerned about focusing on Hawaii. Okay, that's what we're going to try to attempt to do today, is to apply these ideas, but especially the context that they mostly focused on was Spanish, English, kind of emergent bilinguals, and the fact that their communication, their patterns, did not necessarily fit with what was expected for them to do at school. So they were speaking Spanish and English, okay, and mixing it together, and the school was telling them, that's not what we want you to do. That's bad, right? Well, this translanguaging is an attempt to show that perhaps these ways, translanguaging is a very effective way of communicating and should be appreciated. Okay, so here's another quotation. So yeah, I mean, you can read that quickly if you'd like to. Language hierarchies. I just thought it was, I had, when I constructed these slides, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't me who thought that translanguaging was the way to go as an approach, transformative approach, that I'm kind of getting this idea of it being transformative from the literature. Okay, so if you know anything about the translanguaging literature, there's been a lot of research on using, having teachers mix languages in class to try to help the students who themselves are emergent bilinguals develop their own linguistic repertoires, which might be part Spanish, might be part English. But at the same time, we also have translanguaging research that's examined actual communication in context, right? In an effort to demonstrate just how truly talented and creative people are from a linguistic communicative perspective. So thus here's kind of my question, my attempt. So how about people in Hawaii, especially those born and raised here, right, who have been living in this multilingual society for their whole life and perhaps not realizing how linguistically talented they are, right? So yeah, maybe this translanguaging approach can help us see more closely some of the abilities here. So let's take a glimpse. Okay, so I have a couple of short little video clips queued up, and I hope this is going to go smoothly. So I'm going to start with the first one. So I'm hoping you'll see, among other things, maybe on my screen here, this one gentleman. Now, those of you in Hawaii and been in Hawaii for a while might recognize this is the mayor of well, the ex-mayor of Hawaii County over here where I am in Hilo on the Big Island. And he was known to be a great. Unfortunately, he passed away earlier this year from a form of cancer. It was very unfortunate. But he was known for being a great, well, interesting communicator, speaker. And this is from a speech he gave in 2014 at HPU, Hawaii Pacific University's commencement. He also gave a speech here at UH Hilo, a commencement speech about 10 years ago in 2011, 2010. I'm just going to show you like a minute of each of these clips. This is like a 10-minute speech, and I'm not going to really try to analyze it. I'm just going to leave it and hoping that you're going to see that there's this mixing going on. Okay, so hoping the volume's going to come through.
You. I just like leave you with a couple things. One, from this great Hawaiian American storyteller named Ralph Waldo Kamakawiwa Ole Emerson. I threw in the Kamakawiwa Ole because anybody who that smart, that cool, gotta be Hawaiian. But he said, what lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. Remember that, you guys. What lies behind us and what lies before us, tiny matters compared to what lies within us. Say what you mean and mean what you say. You know, my father told me, hey boy, don't just think before you talk. Think and feel before you talk. That way, everything you say come from your heart. Whether people agree or disagree with what you're saying, at least you're honest. You know, so you guys, we're not a Shakespearean pidgin English brother said, no scare them, go get them, okay? So I like leave you guys with that. And finally, from a great Hawaiian scholar, Kamehameha the Great. Before the Battle of El Valley, in the face of overwhelming odds and numbers, he looked at all of his warriors and yelled, Imua ina puki'i, ainu I kawai ava ava. That meant go forward, my brothers and sisters, till you drink the bitter waters of battle, for there is no turning back. Congratulations, class of 2014, Hawaii Pacific University. You earned it, you deserve it. Aloha!
Okay, so yeah, hopefully, so I'm not going to say much about that just yet, but hopefully you can hear, right, English, some Hawaiian, okay, recognize some of our capital P pidgin in there. Okay, let me show you another one. Okay, and this is, so that was, right, a public performance, public speech. Okay, here's another public speech. Okay, and see, hopefully this one is now visible. This is from a testimony, a public testimony in front of the commission from the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. So this is, you know, this is a testimony. Somebody's complaining, arguing that the commission hasn't done enough to service Native Hawaiians in the land, and it actually comes during the controversy over our mountain over here on my island again, Mauna Kea, and the attempts to build the telescope. So yeah, we won't be able to go into too much detail about that, but again, pay attention to the content, of course, but then also the content of the message, but also the linguistic means in which he does this. Okay, just another short little clip.
Yeah. So I urge the commissioners to exercise your guys' authority. You guys have the power to bully the ship, to bail them out a little bit, take some of the water out, kick out the buggers that stay dragging us back. You guys have that authority. Don't wait for the chair to do it. He was appointed by the governor, recycled, thrown back into the mix, right? DLNR, deputy. Now he got a promotion. And what does he do with that promotion? Evict Hawaiians on Hawaiian homelands. Himself, he was there helping take apart the Hale o Kuhio. Yeah, on the solstice. That's how you celebrate solstice. That's how you honor Kaneho'olani. Aila no hoi. Yeah. So that's what we've been seeing and witnessing. So mahalo nui to Mauna Kea for bringing all of these issues from the department.
Okay, so I'm going to stop there. And so again, right, you can recognize English, some Hawaiian thrown in for sure. And this is, it's a very, it's a serious message being delivered. As you can tell by the situation. Okay, one more, and again, a very different scene, but a public situation. So let's see, hopefully you can see. This is from a theater production by a group of youngsters, high school students from one of our Hawaiian medium schools. And by the way, all these, I'm taking these are all on YouTube. I have the links if you want to watch more of these later, but they're publicly available. Anybody can watch and see this, mixing of languages. Okay, and this is mostly in Hawaiian. There's some, I found YouTube with subtitles. Okay, but let's see what we get here. Just a short little minute clip.
O vai ke la. O coach kina wo kono mako ya e nare ku Super Bowl me mako. Ike o ke ki. No. E ki o i kuku ko. Ike o ki no i la lo ma. Oh, aloha, coach.
Aloha mai kako, mahalo ke kono ana mai. Ele ai, si Hawks fan oi ke kai.
Ai, o mau ho oli. Hey, coach.
Oh,
Ew. Oh.
Oh, look at that pass.
Oh, look at that pass. Yeah. Yes.
Oh. Okay, so yeah, just a quick little clip, and actually stop just a second too short because she actually says something in Hawaiian, but she begins by saying yes, sir, before going into saying that, oh, my team won. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the slides. Okay, so hopefully, we're going to talk more about some of the details in a second. But you can see just examples of different languages being used together, languages that are recognizable to us. Okay, and see here, right from YouTube. Okay, so that leads us to problem number 2. So if we recognize that there's this what I'm calling translanguaging going on, and if we think, well, hey, this is an important way of communicating that happens here in Hawaii, and hey, I want to put the word out, I want to let people know, let educators know, that there's a lot of this going on. Okay, well, how can we do this? How can we use this idea of translanguaging to demonstrate the linguistic talents of people here it could be in any place, but specifically here in Hawaii. Okay, so I just have so it should be through So what I recommend is to us, researchers, analysts, is through the analysis. Okay, and these are just my recommendations, and you can certainly disagree, and you can tell me where you think this is off or wrong. But I just have some suggestions, and it's not It's not this is not the only ways of going about it. But I certainly suggest it to be very micro-analytic in nature. So in other words, me showing you those videos, you might say, oh yeah, I can see something going on, but it's not, the micro analysis would be taking us through, what a lot of, if you're students or researchers of language, what we're used to doing, which is examining closely the details of the language being used, right? So, even though we might hope that society might recognize that this, there's something interesting here, but kind of, taking it upon us as the analysts to kind of demonstrate through our analysis, just how complex and richly organized translanguage can be. Okay, so here are just some suggestions. And again, this just suggestions, and you're gonna have like 5 of them, and it's not like they're mutually exclusive. It can be used, certainly hoping they'll be used in combination. But one thing you look for is the relationship between the languages or among the languages being used. Okay, which is not to say like, oh, let's think about how that person is, cognitively structuring languages in their head. No, let's just look at the data and let's kind of, look at the structure. How, where is something that looks like Hawaiian? Where is that coming in? Where is English? Okay, and at the same time, consider the the communicative effects of this relationship. Okay, this person's putting Pidgin in together with English, maybe some Japanese in. Okay, what is being accomplished here in this particular situation? Okay, and then bringing this over from heteroglossia, the non-referential meaning. So indexicality is a concept that I've used. And here, you really need to know kind of the socio-historical background of a society and of the languages in that society. So using Pidgin, capital P Pidgin, together with English and maybe with Hawaiian. Okay, what kind of beliefs are behind that, and what kind of message is that sending? If it's a kind of a juxtaposition of seemingly contradictory ideologies. Okay, also consider, right, who is this intended for? Who is actually there, perhaps listening to this? But something, the idea of recipient design, audience design, right? How and why is this being designed for this particular audience? Okay, and the last one, and this is going to come up in a couple more little things I'm going to show. Okay, is to keep an eye out for translating, because what I'm finding in a lot of my, the gathering of these different examples is that translanguaging is done through what I'm calling translation. Okay, it's not like the official, you get an interpreter and they're just translating, which might also be kind of translanguaging, but this is a kind of translating on the fly, kind of translating for a specific purpose, right? And again, here you have to consider the recipient and perhaps what the meaning of that is and what you're accomplishing. So again, these are just some suggestions that are all supposed to kind of work together to give us this micro-analysis. Okay, so now I have a few more examples. This time they're transcribed, but not, the intent now is not to do like a micro-analysis is the way that, well, we would like to do it here in just a short presentation. Okay, but just to point out some of the interesting points, some of the things that we will want to maybe expand on when we do the actual analysis. So here's this is a different speaker, a different speech from the second one we just saw, but this is from the same testimony in front of the DHHL, Department of Hawaiian Homelands. And this is actually, it's a little bit cheating because it's a young person from Samoa who is giving a speech. Okay, and so, I won't read through all of this, but starts out with aloha kako, which is recognizable as a Hawaiian greeting. Okay, then he gives a short prayer in Samoan. Okay, and right, that would, my informants tell me that there's kind of something interesting going on there as well, but he does call us a prayer later. Okay, and then he starts into what might be recognized as kind of formal English. I want to address Chairman Ayla and the members of the board, the members of the commission. Yesterday, Sunday, October 20th, marked the 100th day of the Lahui's time on the Mauna. Okay, so notice Lahui's, kind of an English, right, possessive construction using a Hawaiian term, Mauna. Okay, again, Hawaiian originally. Now, because of the Mauna Kea controversy, perhaps very recognizable by all people in Hawaii, perhaps. Okay, but again, there's something going on here. And then it continues on in what we'd say is English structure. There was a birthday, there was music, there was ceremony. Okay, and he continues on, and I've just marked to get us, what would just get us started here with some of what are terms that would come from Hawaiian. So we have some Hawaiian terminology, we have a Hawaiian greeting, we have a Samoan prayer, and we have English, formal English perhaps, and kind of an English structure. So the structural component here would be especially to recognize that we got English structure, we have Hawaiian terms being used, okay, and then we would want to keep analyzing this and consider, well, what is the effect of this translanguaging, the communicative effect, what kind of what is being indexed here, and then also he's talking to the commission. It's being recorded. It's going to be posted on YouTube. Okay, what is the audience design? Okay, so lots of interesting things going here, and I apologize I won't be able to, it'd be kind of cool to take any of these little excerpts and do like a whole data session on them. But yeah, right now, obviously don't have the time. Here's another one. Okay, and I want to show this. This is from the same commencement speaker, Billy Kanoy, right? And this is actually from his earlier speech that he made over here on my island at the University of Hilo's commencement. Okay, and so this is in the middle, and so yeah, it's a little bit hard to get the context here, but he's speaking here. Somebody said one time, and it made sense, success is just getting up and dusting yourself off. One more time, then you fell. It's that simple. Okay, and then something that I think is recognizable as what I would call a pigeon, capital P, pigeon structure. No get confused, you guys. People make life out to be chess when it's really just checkers. Okay, and there's some pronunciation there that's maybe kind of invoking, pigeon in a sense. And then, so no let it be any more confusing than it needs to be. Okay, so again, marked here in green as a pigeon construction. Okay, and then he goes into, which sounds like English, right? Oh, so many who have helped you get here, mom and dad. And then he, continues with some pronunciations that are perhaps marked by a local pigeon accent: grandma, grandpa, sister, brother, husband, wife, professors. But then he goes back, librarians, people in the community, pastor at church, kind of very English-like. And then we get more of this no construction, no forget, and a very marked by a local kind of pronunciation. No forget, say thank you. No forget, say mahalo. Okay, my father told me one time, and I agree, no such thing as saying mahalo too much. Okay, so I wanted to, and there's a lot more we could say here, but what I especially wanted to choose this for is, looking at the details, right? Something that's been pointed out in the concern is that people who use pigeon in public, right, sometimes, and Billy Kanoy, the speaker, does this as well, will use it for comedic purposes, to get a laugh, to get a joke, and he certainly does that. But if you really examine the details, and this is why you need a micro-analysis, you see that he structures his speech so that pigeon will kind of stand out as advice, as markers of kind of serious advice, right? This no forget, say thank you. No, I mean, this is not a joke, right? He's telling his audience, giving serious advice. Okay, so that's what I want to point out with this, the kind of, the structure to me kind of highlights the fact that we have a pigeon construction here that is marking this advice through the usage of pigeon. Okay, and this is actually from the excerpt I showed you. Yeah, I want to try to bring this to the speech to conclusion in like 10 minutes, so I'm going to kind of rush through this. And this is just a fact, when he invoked the name Ralph Waldo Emerson, but he added the Hawaiian name Kamaka Viva Ole, and then he uses some kind of pigeon pronunciations. I threw in the Kamaka Viva Ole, and he gets a laugh, he gets a joke. I mean, he makes a joke and gets a laugh, and then he goes and he's, what I think is recognizably kind of an English construction, and but he said, and what lies behind us, and it's it's serious advice here. Okay, and then as you saw in that speech, that little excerpt, he goes on and he uses more pigeon. He quotes Kamehameha the Great in Hawaiian. Okay, but I've actually written on this previously, and I spent a good couple pages just talking about his combination of Kamaka Viva Ole with the name Ralph Waldo Emerson, because that in itself is, a voice invoking a literary figure that's supposed to be kind of revered in English academia, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and he's putting in the Hawaiian name and thus kind of invoking these ideologies of, say, an English literary figure, right? In contrasting that with Hawaiian, which had been, a denigrated language in Hawaii, but now is seeing a change in its ideology, and he's putting that together, and he's talking about it as how it should be together, because of how, Hawaiian is kind of indexing positivity and intelligence. So I just, and I just wanted to show that to you guys and talk a little bit about it, because to me, that's just an amazing piece of work that he does just by putting in a Hawaiian name. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about that for now. Okay, and this is that public theater performance. And this is actually, I didn't have space to put the translations for the Hawaiian, but this is right at the end. They're watching the Super Bowl together, right? And using terms like Seahawk fan, using English terminology. And then they had bet previously to that, the women, the girls, right? And so what she says, yes, sir. And she says, my team won. And then they had previously bet, and one of the girls had said, I'll give you a car if your team wins. And she says, now, okay, that's, where's my car? That's my car. And the woman who bet the car says, okay, close your eyes, right? And she goes and she kind of fills with something, obviously not a car. And they start talking amongst themselves, the women and the coach, right? Saying, oh, right, maybe that's the key, right? And she comes back and she places a toy car in the hand of the woman she bet with. And then we get these, junk. And then we even get this, bra. And then we get this mana'o maoli in Hawaiian. I thought it was a real car. So to me, this is just a whole interesting scenario where you get Hawaiian, speakers, youngsters in public, right, who are speaking largely Hawaiian, but are inserting, and I don't know if we want to call this English. There's English certainly in there, right? Or inserting slang or perhaps something resembling pidgin. Okay, but they are translanguaging. And at the same time, they're kind of showing their chops in Hawaiian, but at the same time, kind of creating something different, kind of invoking their, even the fact that they're talking about, say, sports and betting. And that's the whole idea of this play, was to have these youngsters come together, use Hawaiian to talk about kind of modern, they talk about bullying and other topics that are concerns to youngsters. And I think it's kind of crucial that they're using this space to kind of create a little bit of a different identity, but yet at the same time showing the identity as perhaps a bilingual in today's modern Hawaiian world, but somebody who is certainly very fluent and capable in Hawaiian. So again, just kind of marvelous creativity going on. Okay, let's see. Now I want to talk a little bit about that idea of translating. And this is an excerpt it's an excerpt from the local news, where they reported a story about a woman in the House. She was a representative, actually, again, from the big island here, from Puna over here, on our island over here, and how she had used Hawaiian on the floor of the House of Representatives, in Hawaii, and how it became a controversy. So, and they show in the news clip, her using Hawaiian, and so this is her Hawaiian. It's actually she's just saying thank you to the speaker who spoke before her and asking that that speech be put into the official record. It's not saying anything controversial at all, but we get the voiceover. AP is, so FH is Faye Hano. She was the controversial Hawaiian speaker. AP is the reporter. It talks, says here in 21 and 22, sets off a firestorm, which wasn't really apparent that it was such a firestorm, okay? But she is asked to translate 23 and 24. And then in 25, she does something that, again, to me, seems to be very just remarkable, because she replies after a brief pause, right? 1 second, right? She responds in Hawaiian, but basically what she says here, Olival imaki unuhimai, is I don't want to translate. And then she translates that, right? So it's translanguaging. She goes from Hawaiian to English. And so she translates what she just said, just to say that she's not going to translate what she had earlier said. And here, again, especially if you think about the context, the kind of the recipient design of this, right? And there's a certain amount of power that goes here, being amongst a group of non-Hawaiian speakers, using Hawaiian, being asked to translate and then refusing to translate, but refusing to translate by translanguaging. Okay, so this negotiation of when to speak a certain language, say Hawaiian in this case, and we have lots of kind of that negotiation going on, but results in translanguaging, right? And this translating is kind of part of this whole, powerful negotiation. Just again, we could go on much more in this excerpt. And I have one more excerpt, and this was just a couple months ago. And this is again a public space. One of our Hawaiian politicians, a guy named Kai Kahele, and again, he started off over here on the Big Island as a local representative, but now he's a representative from Hawaii to Washington, D.C. And 2 months ago, during our Hawaiian Language Month, he gave a speech that was, this is in Washington, D.C., in front of, I guess, the House, the Speaker of the House. And he gave a speech where he translanguages, and he translanguages by translating, right? So I rise this morning to honor Mahina Olelo Hawaii, right? And here's the translation, Hawaiian Language Month, okay? Colleagues, I have the wonderful privilege of being Native Hawaiian. My culture has served as a guiding light throughout my entire life, a light that has survived because of the many kupuna, Hawaiian term, right? Originally, anyway. Our elders, he translates, right? And who protected this light and who have protected our native indigenous language. For Native Hawaiians and for so many indigenous peoples, our language is essential for our people to live and thrive. In fact, we have an Olelo Noeau, okay, a proverb, and again, he translanguages, right? He translates that says, Iko Olelo no ke ola, Iko Olelo no kamake, and then he translates the proverb, right? So here he is, and this is, right, not in Hawaii, but this is, using the skills learned here in Hawaii to translanguage, right, on the floor of the House of Representatives. And again, in this case, there's a certain power in terms of using the Hawaiian and then showing, his ability to translate this in front of his, presumably non-Hawaiian colleagues. Okay, and just, we could talk about this and, the kind of the type of power, the type of, just the type of communication this is. And it's translanguaging. It's a little bit different from the other instances and the clips I showed you, but still, nonetheless, something to take notice and something that arises from a person in Hawaii making use of his linguistic repertoire in this case. Okay, so almost done. Just a couple points to take home, right? So these are all instances of translanguaging occurring in public space in Hawaii. And this was, I just found these on YouTube. Right? Of course, I'm interested in this topic, but it wasn't very hard. It wasn't like I had to go out and really search, right? This is available and this happens in public. Okay, and here, you might want to argue with me, but to me, these are incredibly creative, effective, transformative, right? I mean, we can build that argument. Typical common ways of occupying public space here in Hawaii. Okay, probably not taught in schools. Again, not totally in touch with what happens in our schools, but I do have, teach students over here who come in and constantly tell me that, our local pidgin language that they're told not to use, not to speak, right? Even in, 2020, 2021. Okay, so probably not taught this, but yet develop the ability to do this and do it in public for public testimonies, public speeches. Okay, and then this one, right? So I haven't mentioned at all what might be going on inside of these people's brains. I don't think it really matters, but it's a skill or an ability that has been developed here. Okay, so yeah, so they're making use of their linguistic repertoires to accomplish communicative goals. And again, we can argue how effectively they're doing it. To me, this is pretty tremendous. So perhaps, right, and these quote unquote effective means of communicating. So, translanguaging needs to be considered more in terms of planning of educational programs and in the goals and actual instruction in classrooms. Okay, and the last thing, this is going to be my problem 3, and I want to end it here, and I don't have much to say here, but this was kind of my task. The MO team kind of asked me, to give some advice about how to put the word out there for my topic. And so once you have an analysis or a description of this, okay, how do you create some kind of consciousness about translanguaging. And if you want to show your support, and if you think that this is something that should be developed amongst the students, the young people. Okay, and yeah, I'm just kind of repeating myself here. So how to put the word out here, and here I'm just going to have shout out because, I'm really interested in doing this analysis, showing my students and trying to put the word out to a certain degree, but I have to give a big shout out to a lot of you over there at UH Manoa, not necessarily for translanguaging, but for putting the word out for, well, certainly our indigenous language of Hawaiian, but especially I have listings here of what's, a lot of the great things that's going on, at Manoa in terms of our pidgin, right, advocacy for our Creole language, right? So we have publishing, right, the Sato Center. This is something I got from that site about a new, Professor Christina Higgins published about linguistic discrimination, especially here in Hawaii, presenting, there's, all these great videos from the Hawaiian Pigeon Summit that was maybe 3 years ago or so. And then the social media that a lot of you guys have developed, the Pigeon Coop, and then the Facebook page that I know Christina has also been involved in. And so that's about as far, if you guys had ideas about helping and suggestions, I'd be all for hearing that. But I better, gone a little bit over more than I had hoped. So a few references, but yeah, thank you very much for listening and for hanging in there. Appreciate the audience in this kind of strange Zoom situation that we still find ourselves in. But mahalo nui loa.